Hello.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, Simon, it's Skylar. How you doing?
Simon. Hello, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
Hello.
How you doing? Hey,
Hello.
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
This is Simon Brooks, and I am the host of Conversations with Storytellers. Hi, my name is Simon Brooks, and I am the host of Conversations with Storytellers, a podcast of wisdom, folk and fairy tales from our elders. A meeting with professional storytellers. I decided to travel around the country when I could to interview some of the elders in the community of traditional storytelling. Each storyteller shares their thoughts on our profession and gems of wisdom and sometimes a story or two. I'm glad you're here. I do want to thank Chris Jedd, a good friend of mine who did the amazing music. I hope you like the sound. This episode features Odds Bodkin. Odds is a storyteller whose work, when I heard it, gave me permission to do a lot of things I did as a kid. Make noises, sound effects, character voices and tell stories. Firstly, writing poems whilst tending bar in New York City. Odds then telling stories to children in Central Park and linking those stories to nature in the park, to performing on world stages, sharing some of the best retellings of myths and legends, folk and fairy tales there are. He is the consummate professional who winds music in and out of his performance, giving an in-depth, multi-sensory experience that few others can deliver. Odds and I met on and off in passing, and then when I moved to New London, New Hampshire, we became good friends. We often talk about all sorts of things. With his dog Samson, who you'll hear occasionally panting, that's not me, but this is the story of the mythic maker Odds Bodkin from his own mouth. Enjoy.
I can say that it's a delight to have you here in my home once again, Simon.
Thank you very much.
On this very cold morning.
It is chilly.
And if you hear a ringing in the background, those are the wind chimes on the front porch.
I did win.
Making their noise when the breeze kicks up.
Yeah. So as Oz just said, we are sitting in Odds Bodkin's home. The fire in the wood-burning stove is beautiful. There's a Christmas tree set up in the little alcove in the front room, and the old Celtic harp's in the corner with a 12-string guitar. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm happy to see you again.
So, where did you grow up? What was it like being little Odds Bodkin?
I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, about 15 miles from Washington, D.C. Moved there when we were 3 from New York. And it was weird because I was one of those little boys who spontaneously made strange, loud noises just from sheer joy of being alive. I can still remember walking down the road there in our neighborhood and just making big, high-pitched, weird noises.
Huh.
And so I've been deranged for a long time.
So you said you were in New York. Which part of New York were you in before that?
I was born in New York, in Manhattan.
Oh, on the island?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then my parents, when I was 3, left. They left New York. We were in Long Island for a little bit, and then moved to Virginia. I grew up in Virginia.
Did you like it there?
I had a fabulous childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there storytellers in your family?
My father was a storyteller. My mother was a concert pianist, and so she ended up being a music teacher in Alexandria, where we lived. My dad had an extraordinary memory and vocabulary, and he used to tell me stories when I was a little boy, and he would sometimes make them up.
Oh, that's cool.
He was an engineer, and there's almost more the surroundings, though. We were one of the first neighborhoods in a part of Virginia that had yet to grow. And so we were surrounded by farmland and forests and a stream filled with living things. And we little children, from the age of 3, I was out and about with my friends. We'd leave in the morning, come back at dark. You know, we were completely free-range children. There was no danger anywhere. And we spent all our time catching minnows and frogs and snapping turtles and eels and collecting fossils, building tree forts and climbing giant tulip trees and swinging the tops back and forth. And we just had a great time being little kids.
Yeah. Did you have siblings?
I have a sister.
You do?
I still have her.
Good.
Yes.
That's nice to hear. That's nice to hear. Yeah, the woods is a fertile place for the imagination, I think. Forests and streams and rivers, there's magic in those places that feeds into that, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. So, your father was a storyteller, and you said that sometimes he made stories up. Do you remember any of those stories?
He told me the Song of Roland once.
Oh, wow.
But I don't have specific memories of them any longer, if I ever did. I just have memories of the experience from memory. Oh, and like The Last of the Mohicans. Oh, he would just paraphrase books that he had read when he was little.
Wow, that's
to tell me these stories.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So when did you decide that you wanted to be a storyteller? Because you were a folk musician to start with, is that right?
Actually, not.
Oh.
No. I was living in Manhattan. I was about 28. And I'd been going to the Jung Foundation up on Lexington Avenue, reading about depth psychology. I'd had a great many interesting experiences with a great many strange and wondrous people while I lived in New York. Just became fascinated with the unconscious mind and the power of archetypes. I have a degree in cognitive psychology. I just have a BA, but was always interested in the workings of memory, the mind, semantic spaces. You know, I used to do studies in college where you would how quickly in milliseconds can you go from sparrow to turkey, as opposed from sparrow to finch, or from sparrow to penguin. And so what we were doing is we were trying to map the millisecond speeds of people's responses as their brains went with various kinds of images. And it was called research into semantic space. And trying to tease apart whether it really took an infinitely smaller but longer amount of time to go from penguin to earthworm than from penguin to puffin, for instance.
Yeah. Fascinating. And you were at Duke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fancy guy. So how did the storytelling take off then?
Well, I had tended bar in New York for the first few years and would talk to people, and I always kept a little notepad next to me, and I would just begin to write strange snippets of poetry and things like that. Mm-hmm. Just reflecting on the human condition. And then developed, when I finally quit being a bartender, I fell in with a very strange crew up on Madison Avenue called the Central Park Historical Society, which was made up of the black sheep of the Otis Elevator family, Fortune, and a ballerina from New Zealand. And these two were crazy and wonderful people who ran a sort of semi-illegitimate non-profit in order to try to mooch money from their rich friends. I, being an innocent and a dreamer, walked into their second floor office one day, which was also their dwelling, and said, I can make you legitimate. I know a lot about the history of Central Park. Why don't you let me offer programs to school children, to take them about the park, show them the architectural features, as well as do field walks for children to teach them all about nature. Because all of that, being a little kid in Virginia, gave me a kind of an intimacy with all the various plants and all the various tiny insects. I mean, in the upper part of Central Park in the stream there are crayfish, there are tiny freshwater clams, there are all kinds of things you'd never dream would be in Central Park in New York City, right near where the Junkies' Needles are at the old fortress,
Yeah.
And so I devised a set of programs, which they sponsored, but I had to, earn the money from.
Right.
It was I kept all the money. And I went around to these very fancy schools, the Spence School, the Ethical Culture School, schools like that border Central Park, where very wealthy people sent their children to school. And I said, come with me, and I will take you into the park, and I will give you a really interesting educational experience. I had a great little dog, Ophelia. The children loved her so much. So we would just meet these groups of kids in the Conservatory Gardens up at the North End near Harlem. And then I would take them for a walk. And then I developed a big set of 16 by 20 inch blow-up black and white images of the hydrologic cycle, of what it looked like to look into the cell tiers of a leaf from the side, of spiral galaxies, of all kinds of things that gave a sort of a micro to macro look at nature. Told them about the Fibonacci sequence, how you could find it in the whorls of every flower that they looked at. I taught them what they could safely nibble and taste as wild edibles, and all this sort of information that I would turn into a really fun experience for kids. So I struck myself up a little business. And one day I decided I would tell a Native American story called Theft of Fire.
Okay.
And I had a little alto recorder with me. And I told the kids, as part of the experience, this very simple little story. And they listened with a kind of attention that I had never experienced before. None of them was distracted. All of them were listening. All of them were watching. All of them I could see were imaging. And it struck me that this storytelling business, or the activity of storytelling, was doing something in their cognitions that I had never seen before. Since then, I've made a study of it, and it's just called entrainment, where if you can get children to truly be immersed in imaginative imagery, they have almost total recall of the story material. I was just up in Scarborough, Maine, spent 2 days at a lovely school and did a program called Fairy Folks in Old Oaks. And what we do is I told them 2 fairy tales. You have 300 kids in each show. 300, these are 3rd, 4th, 5th graders. Told them 2 of my favorite story tales, The Tale of the Kittens and The Little Shepherd. And then we spent the rest of the residency in their media center, where the teachers that were astounded at how the kids remembered every single detail. I gave them handouts. It's all about how fairy tales are structured inside, and there are clusters of 3. There's a family at first. The hero, be it a girl or a boy, leaves the family. There is an adventure. Magical helpers are encountered. They give magical gifts, which end up saving you later. And all the various structural elements of the classic fairy tale have to have a happy ending. All that.
Yeah, right.
And so we analyzed this with the children. And it was really, really fun. So it gave them much the same thing as screenwriters' courses give movie writers. The secret, inner design of a good movie that you pretty well must follow in order to entertain people.
Right. That's the Joseph Jacobs mythological journey, right?
Yeah, Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey.
Yeah.
Right. And I was a big fan of Joseph Campbell's work. I've read all of his books. you don't find movies that are really effective that don't have this archetypal structure in them.
Yeah.
Or long-winded TV shows. And after telling them that story, I realized that all this music that I've been playing all my life, I had been playing guitar since I was 12, and in college bought a 12-string guitar, my first 12-string guitar, which opened up an entire world in that I discovered that I didn't have to keep it tuned to concert tuning like a folk guitar, C, G, E, and F chords and all that, but could create various open tunings that allowed me to create original music that was good for the background of stories, with all unique fingerings and very unique sounds. And I had just played endlessly in the stairwell in my dormitory in college. Just playing 12-string guitar. Yeah, it was the best acoustics. Sit in the stairwell and play.
Yeah.
And I had all this music that wasn't the kind of music that you could sing to. I was never I've written a few songs for stories in the past. I've written a few songs and had a phase of doing that, but mostly it was just incidental music that would thematically bring out feelings that I could play as I spoke. And that sort of launched things. Because I said, I could take all this music and put it underneath a story as if it were a movie. Wow. And I can do all these weird voices. Because it was that weird little kid making those noises.
I was the same weird little kid.
I think the storytellers are all cut from the same basic muslin.
You could be right.
And so, that's how I started.
Wow. So, I know you don't tell personal stories, although you did tell one. I think it was at Sharing the Fire. That was a really good story, but you don't like to do that. You like to do the folk stories. What do you think is important about the folk stories? Why should we be telling them? Why should kids hear these stories, or adults even?
Well, first of all, they've been time-tested. None of these old stories, be they folk tales, fairy tales, or myths, would even be extant at this point in history if they hadn't had a kind of a psychical energy that they carry that is nourishing to people. They would have been long forgotten. For my money, it's more important to tell a story that I've put my own stamp upon, but nevertheless is time-tested, than to share, my foibles and my heartaches and, my neuroses, if I have any, and anything else.
Yeah.
I've almost been killed a great many times, but I don't ever talk about that. But some people, I'm sure, feel that they must. No, it's more important for me to tell the kinds of stories that when people are 30 years old and they come to my shows, they can say, I saw you when I was a little kid, and I still remember the experience, and I still remember the story, and it's stuck with me all this time, and here's my little boy, and I want to get some of your recordings so that I can share them with him.
That's cool.
Yeah. And I just exercised this skill set with a production that was just invented called Danica the Rose. Danica the Rose we debuted in Peterborough, New Hampshire, back in early October. Jessamina McNeil, who's a wonderful young singer, Sarah Schaefer, who's also a young singer, and then Emily Phelps, who's the accompanist. And 2.5 years ago, Jessamina came to me, and she's a classical singer. She sings all over the place, asking for a fairy tale that could set Dvorak's 23 Moravian duet. Yeah, so she came to me, and she had been listening to my stories a long time. and asked me to write an original fairy tale. Antonin Dvorak was a great Czech composer, one of my favorite classical composers.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. From the New World, or was one of those beautiful symphonies ever written. Everything that he's ever written is beautiful and melodic. And he's a typical classical composer from the mid-1800s. And being a fan of his, and not being familiar with these Moravian duets he wrote for two women's voices, he wrote about 23 duets based on wonderful sort of bucolic themes of love and loss. I go to war, my mother won't let me marry you. There's a bird on top of the building. Let's go, to the vineyard and meet and kiss. These kinds of various little tiny love songs and laments and whatnot, all with some unbelievably beautiful, beautiful melodies. And so she gave me the 23 duets with translations of their lyrics in English. And I listened to them, and I meditated, and I sat down. And I realized that even though none of these old folk songs was connected to the next one, purposely, by rearranging them, I could begin to tease out a story, sort of hidden, latent inside the fragments of story in the lyrics. And so I wrote a fairy tale. It's an hour and 10 minutes long in performance, and it's called Danica the Rose. And she and I worked on the story for a year and a half, back and forth, two different versions, a children's version, an adult version. I mean, we've been booked for the second performance that thus far will be at the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society to perform it. That's our next gig. It's ways away, but it's been booked again, and it'll be booked a lot. I have to, put up a whole page at my site about it. Yeah. I'm still trying to just recover from the fall's commissioned works. And so we performed it in Peterborough, had a stuffed house. They had to bring chairs from upstairs to get all the people in there. Oh, wow. They gave us a standing ovation at the end.
So this was a house concert then?
No, this was in Bass Hall in Peterborough.
And they still had to bring chairs then?
They had to bring chairs from the upstairs. We were very pleased. I know, it was a sold-out show.
So I want to go back to your childhood in Virginia. Was there somebody in your life who was a big influence on you? Or not really?
You mean... I had great teachers. Yeah. I had wonderful teachers. I went to a fabulous high school called Hayfield High School. We were the first graduating class. They had a fantastic drama teacher, Mr. James, who was just amazing. And but I think as I look back on my childhood, it was just mostly the complete freedom that we had. I mean, imagine it's like the Little Rascals. Yeah. Nobody ever told us what to do. We made our own boats. We made our own bows and arrows. We had a wonderful old abandoned antebellum house nearby we were forbidden to go near, that we went to every day with wild horses running around in the woods that used to chase us. We had a tree, a tulip tree, which is a tulip poplar that was at least 90 feet high, and two tall trunks came out of a single trunk at the bottom. Okay. So by the time you climbed, one little kid, it was just like a ladder. It was the most amazing tree to climb. We could get all the way to the very top. My friend Andy and I, or any of us, we had a gang of about 6 little kids. And we rode our bikes, and we did this. And the only way you could get up into this tree, though, was on the end of a rope. You had a piece of wood. You had to throw it over the first lower limb and hoist yourself up, because it was impossible to get up to the first level otherwise. Right. So this was our tree exclusively, because the other kids couldn't figure out how to do this. And we could pelt them with objects and spit on them and stuff if we wanted. But anyway, we'd get to the very top of the tree.
Reprobate.
And go back. You could swing it. You could get the arc swinging. And go back and forth like this. And we would get these treetops swinging past each other. Like a 30-foot arc. The skinny little top of the tree. And a tulip tree is beautiful. It's filled with these wonderful, strange, big leaves that look like a mitten, and flowers that are orange and green that are tulips. So they're big tulips. They're not tulips, but they're tulip-like flowers. And at certain times of the year, you could be in the top of this tree just surrounded by vivid colors. You could see all the way to the Masonic Temple in Alexandria, because this tree towered above all the other trees in the forest. Could look all around, see the neighborhood.
That's really cool.
We did all these things that were dangerous. This was, imagine if nowadays, if parents allow their children to walk down to the corner market, cops will accuse them of bad parenting. Child family services will come in and tear your kids from your home because you are, quote, a neglectful parent. And that's probably, I don't know, a good thing nowadays, because after the 1960s, the certain forces of wildness and craziness were loosed in America that made it suddenly dangerous for little children.
Yeah, it's the same in the UK as well.
We were never in any danger.
Yeah.
Everybody would do nothing but look out for you. We could walk into any neighborhood and knock on the door, and there would be this nice mom. And she'd say, "Are you lost?" And say, "Yes, we are." "Oh, do you want a cookie?" "Yes, we do." Here the little kids with sticks, and muddy feet. And some nice lady would give us a cookie and say, "Do you want me to call your mother?" We say, "No, but where are we?" And, we just wandered.
Yeah.
And no one ever hurt us. So...
it's a different world we live in now, isn't it?
It's a different world we live in now. And I think part of just feeling the freedom to pursue a profession as strange as storytelling is born still of a lot of that freedom that I grew up experiencing, and fearlessness.
Yeah. So you talked about your Dvorak project. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is your most rewarding work or most unexpected work to date? And would that fall into that category, or is there something else that...
Oh gosh,
you've done all sorts of different things. I mean, recently you just did this commission for the New Hampshire Trails, right?
It's called The Old Man Speaks, and I debuted it. I've performed it only once, well, twice, but only once officially. Up in the White Mountains at the foot of Mount Washington for the AMC's White Mountain Trail Crew Centennial Celebration. And it was a commissioned work. It was commissioned by a wonderful man named Robert White, who 2 years ago came to me and asked me if I would create a story for this event that's going to take place in 2 years. Wants the history of the White Mountains. We went back and forth on the fictional setting, and I did a lot of research, spoke to members of the trail crew, met with them, interviewed people, read books, wrote, and then we edited the piece, and I composed original musical themes on the harp and the guitar and the 6-string guitar and the 12-string guitar, and then performed it. That's all that's taken place with it thus far. But we do have a good recording of it.
You do?
Oh, yes.
Good. Was that at the event that Aidan and I saw? Or was...
No, that was the preliminary one.
Right.
No, the actual performance of it...
You recorded that too, didn't you?
No, didn't.
Oh, okay. I thought
No.
you were going to record it.
Yeah, we've heard that story,
Yeah,
right?
it's a great story.
Very different from anything else I've ever done. Like 19 little episodes, and it's all flies back and forth in time and whatnot. No, the official version was done under a big tent at the Mount Washington Auto Road field that's down there in the valley.
Yeah.
And they had their big event set up there.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do you like these jobs that pop out of nowhere? Like that one and the Dvorak? Do they stretch you, do you think?
These two did.
Yeah?
These two consumed me.
Yeah.
It's nice to have the Danica the Rose piece finished, because now we've done all the work. Jasmina has a score that she's taken little snippets of the interstitial music between my readings, and we have intros and outros over the music. It's almost like a piece of musical theater. And then she and Sarah are just powerful and magical singers together. She's a mezzo-soprano and Sarah Schaefer's a soprano. And so listening to them in this performance was thrilling. We got a recording of it too. I've just been so busy. I haven't had time to do anything with these things yet. And I'm going to be doing 2 Beowulfs.
I know, I saw that.
Yeah.
I need to come and see that.
Oh, yeah, like one is for the Cambridge Boat Club. I have 2 of them back to back, the 11th and 12th of January. But then the other is for Grendel's Den. I'm going into my 4th season doing shows down at Grendel's Den.
That's so neat.
Oh, it's really fun.
Yeah.
It's what a
Beowulf
fun
is.
audience that is.
That's such a good story. I love it. The way that you do that. So, but how long have you been telling Beowulf for?
6 years, maybe.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What was the first epic that you did? Was that the Odyssey?
The Odyssey.
And that came out of... I know the background story to this.
It's funny,
because
yes.
yeah, it's a great story because Marion Cross School, right?
Mm-hmm.
They put an ad out because the guy, what was his name?
It's David Millstone.
David Millstone. So he's actually
He's still around.
He's still around. Does he still do square dancing or contra?
As far as I've heard, I haven't spoken with him in 25 years, but
yeah,
I understand he's still out there doing his thing.
Because he was a remarkable teacher, Marion Cross, social studies teacher. And he put this whole program together of the Odyssey, and then he put an advert in the paper. Is that right?
That's right.
And said,
well, no, not in the paper. He got a list of storytellers in New Hampshire.
Okay.
There weren't very many of us back then, but I don't know who else got it. But he said, I need a storyteller who can tell an episode or 2 from the Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote him back and said, I'm sorry, I can tell the whole thing.
But you couldn't, did you?
I couldn't.
You sneaky little man.
He gave me the job, and I had 3 months in which to create the first version of it. And then went back to the school, I guess, 4 or 5 years in a row to tell it. And it got better and better.
Yeah, and you set candles up, from what I've heard.
I would have a candelabrum burning there. It was my portable shamanic campfire. And we'd sit in the darkened room, and it would all be in the candlelight. It was a very fascinating and ancient feeling kind of way to experience storytelling. But then, schools started to become litigious. They said, Mr. Bodkin, you can't have an open flame in our school in the middle of our gymnasium
with a wooden floor.
And I said, well, what's going to happen? It's going to fall over, and then the floor is not flammable. But eventually, the fire marshals got the better of me, and I abandoned my old candelabrum, and miss it still.
But you still tell that story.
The Odyssey? Oh, yes. Yeah. I'll be doing it at Grendel's Den. I'm doing a few of them. I've got a few of them booked. It's just fun. I don't tell the whole thing that often unless people want to invite me for 3 days. It takes 3 days a 45-minute show, 2 of them a day for 3 days to tell the
It's huge.
total 4 hours of it. You still doing your Gilgamesh?
Not as often as I'd like to do it, but I do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you do the Odyssey, you do Samson, which is a really good story.
No, I do.
Hercules, sorry. Samson and Delilah. You do Hercules.
Yeah, I have Hercules, the legendary bully is what I call it, or Hercules in Hell. I was just invited, I just performed it for a very interesting crew of ex-military and CIA people down in Virginia.
Wow.
At a private gathering. Let me go let the pooch out for a second. Which was fascinating. And they loved it. We had a great time. And it was just like 3-4 weeks ago, maybe. As far as the epics go, there's this long version of the myth of Hercules. And there is the Odyssey. The Harper and the King. I have a version of David and Goliath.
Right. That's really good.
Yeah. No one has ever asked me to perform that except once.
Really?
Really, yeah.
I mean, do you perform it? Do you take it out? Or is it only on request? Because that must have taken a lot of work to create.
There's a lot of work.
Yeah.
No. And then there's also The Hidden Grail, Sir Percival and the Fisher King.
That's a great story as well.
That was nice. A young couple who is getting married wants to use the opening lines of it. Or maybe it's the Dame Ragnell. Love 'tis a weed lest it's an oak. True love to the heart's earth grapples slow, while false love's promise quick to poke itself upward and spread its show, seldom finds the height time can bestow. Instead, it bursts its heated bloom and starts to die, though it seems to grow in passing clouds of sweet perfume. This nice young couple, wanted to put that in their wedding vows. So I said, yeah, sure.
That's really cool. So when you're looking for stories, what does the story have to have for you, or does it just speak to you? What makes you pick a story?
I don't know. The word juice comes to mind, but it's not a very elegant way to describe archetypal meaning, depth, humor, opportunities to do characters, things like that.
Yeah. When you pick a story, what's the process that you go through to learn a story?
Well, one of my favorite stories that I've told for university audiences and for adult audiences is Judhisthira at Heaven's Gate, which is a tale from the Mahabharata.
Oh.
And it's this beautiful story. I'll play you some of the music for it. So I dreamt up this sort of imitation sitar-like guitar music.
Why'd you do an imitation sitar when you have one?
Because
you don't have to.
I haven't figured out. I can't sit in a lotus position. I'm a little too stiff for that, music like that,
Odds went on to tell a story which I'm not going to include here because of the length of it, and then we got back to the podcast. Here we are. So how do you feed yourself artistically? How do you keep the battery charged? Is it the whiskey and the fire?
I don't know. There's enough of a variety of projects that I can hardly keep up now. these last 2 years, we're doing these commission pieces, the White Mountains piece and the Danica the Rose piece. Just had me on the ropes, especially the White Mountain piece, because the Danica piece, I wrote a story, but didn't score or do any musical work. But the White Mountains piece, there was a lot of music, and so that kept me going. Developing new musical techniques keeps me going.
Yeah, and you've also written the Mage's the Mage's daughter,
The Water Mage's Daughter.
Water Mage's daughter, which is really good.
That took me 25 years to write that.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
And you've done a couple of picture books, and aren't you working on another book right now? Or am I? I
spent 10 years writing adult novels, and have yet to sell a single one. And had a literary agent for a while, and got tired of working with her. And I don't know if I'm cut out to be a novelist. I think novelists have a certain way of doing things that I just don't possess. But I gave it a good shot, and I have these really good stories.
Yeah, because you're very keyed into this kind of stuff. Planet Earth. Or I get that impression, anyway.
Yeah, well, I was out in Boulder, a year ago maybe, at the Boulder Climate Conference, and told Fall of the Titans, the Greek myth of Gaia. It's another epic that I've gotten into my basket of tricks. And it's so amazing. The Titans were the parents of Zeus and Hera and all the Greek gods.
Right.
And they were the first earth formers. Gaia is the planet. She's the original goddess. And then she starts having babies. She has the mountains. She has the sea. She has the atmosphere. She then hooks up with the atmosphere, and they start having babies, and they have these 12 perfect Titan babies. Tethys, the Titaness of the streams. You've got Phoebe, who's the Titaness of prophecy. A whole host of them, but they're all involved in Oceanus, who brings salt to the sea. There are all these. They represent various ecological systems. And so, in this interpretation of the Gaia story, the overthrow of the Titans by Zeus, it's just like human beings overthrowing the natural earth and messing it up. Yeah. And so it's this gigantic metaphor for the study of climate problems. And I developed this years ago and did workshops for people who came down from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in my workshops to try to learn to communicate the science that's frightening everybody so badly through storytelling, because they've had 30 years to scare this civilization into slowing down, and absolutely nothing has helped. No. To the point at which we passed so many tipping points that we're in for a pretty wild ride, planet-wide. Yeah. And all manner of dire things are approaching. And so that was an attempt to use storytelling. It was called, and I have a version of it at my website called Story Science, where I would tell this story to kids and then have this big 25-minute movie that I made that has all the physics involved in how climate change operates. Wow. It's a whole movie, and I tell the story, and then I switch to my projector, and up comes the movie, and then I live narrate the movie as I go through all these various interesting images and videos that talk about the planetary system, all the way from the giant sheath that's 40,000 miles out in space in the direction of the sun. It's our magnetic field, and it's the first big protector of the planet, right? And the solar winds come in and they hit it, and they stream right around the planet. And it's created by our magnetic field, which is created by the grist between the core of the iron core of the planet, which is the size of the moon, and then all the other gooey stuff, the stone, all grinding against itself, it creates the magnetic field, just like electricity is created by magnets spinning next to each other. Only this creates the magnetic field that's so huge, it protects us from the solar winds. And if it weren't there, the ultraviolet radiation would cook us all. There would be no life on the planet. Right now, and it sort of doesn't. The magnetic field is shifting at the moment,
which is done before.
As long as it's still there, then we're okay. So, and then I go into the atmosphere and talk about the various layers of the atmosphere, all the way down to the troposphere. Tropo is Greek for change, and that's the layer that's about a mile high or so, maybe 5 miles at the most, in places where weather takes place, where clouds move, storms move, and then above that you're up into the stratosphere, which is very different, only has these really thin high clouds, and then you get up into the ionosphere and the exosphere and all the way up to about 100 miles out, in which case when you look at it from the side, this thin coating of gas on the side of the planet is all we've got, and we're trapped under it, and it's like a giant closed system, and we're cooking it, and so anyway, so I've got this thing called story science that I also do on occasion, and people have asked for it, and I do it at schools for middle schoolers on occasion.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
If there was a piece of advice that if you were talking to a young person that wanted to be a folk storyteller, what piece of advice would you give them?
You mean they wanted to make a profession of it?
Yeah, if they wanted to do this for a career.
I would tell them that they need to find some way that allows them to be unique in what they do, and also to appreciate, if they want to be, it's telling folk and fairy tales and myths, appreciate why these stories are still around, and to, no matter what culture they come from, to honor them completely. You can step easily into the sort of PC realm these days of cultural appropriation, where people will holler at you. If you're not German, you can't tell the German folktale. If you're not Australian, you can't do this or can't do that, which negates the sort of collective wisdom of all the stories of all the peoples. But there are plenty of people who are quite militant and adamant about that these days. I find it to be an utterly bogus position, small-minded, but that's just my opinion. Because the end game of that is that the categories grow narrower and narrower, to the point at which no one can tell any story except one that comes from your direct ethnic heritage.
Right.
So it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And anyone over in this country has probably 3 or 4 ethnic heritages anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I'd tell them to make sure that they can offer not just the stories, but genuine educational experiences that come along with the stories. That you can tell a story and then and walk away from it, or you can tell a story and then go back and with kids explore it,
right.
Develop materials, learning materials, and that has helped me over the years.
Yeah, I love
continue to stay in business.
Yeah, I love telling stories. I mean, working with kids to tell their stories or their versions of stories. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
To see what kids can pull out the bag, and some of it is amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll do a sit down with a bunch of kids, a class of them, and we'll do a creative story making session where I'll tell them, okay, I'm looking for an idea. Any idea in the universe will work. It can be the fact that it's cloudy today. It can be the fact that you might have a pebble stuck in the grooves of your tennis shoe that you got on the way to school today. It can be anything in the world, and we'll grow a story from it. And so some kid will say, a pink dog, So I say, yeah, you know what? Once a pink dog was walking down the sidewalk. What was this pink dog's name? Henrietta the pink dog.
Samson.
Before you know it, Henrietta the pink dog will be having adventures and going places, doing all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like doing this with kids. And then I'll animate the story as it grows with the 12-string guitar. And, and then every once in a while some kid will say something, like Batman ate it. And I'll say, no Batman, all original characters, no cartoons, no Frozen characters, no Disney. You have to make up something yourself. So I'll edit that stuff out.
Right.
And then they sort of end up squeezing their imaginations into a completely new narrative. And then I'll leave that with the teacher and say, this story now belongs to your students. Have them draw pictures, rewrite it, perfect it, and it helps because kids don't have much opportunity to imagine nowadays.
I don't think they have much opportunity to vocalize either. They're not allowed to express themselves as much.
Yeah.
Because they're so inward with devices.
And this goes all the way back to the studying of cognitive psychology that I did, is that there are a couple of things that are happening. Firstly, because entertainment comes at children at such a rapid pace these days, the pacing of everything is so hot, especially in video games coming out of their devices. And it's so exciting and so stimulating for them with such an adrenaline kick coming along that when they close their devices, they look at the real world around them and they're bored by it. Mm-hmm. It's not moving quickly enough. It's not leaping forward to entertain them. And so they become entertainment addicts, little ones, who are prone to depression because the only way they can avoid it is to continue to be stimulated. And so there's a kind of a strange grinding wheel that's working upon kids these days where that and with the social media aspect is causing all this angst and woe. The devices are really, really destructive in that way. Mm-hmm. They have their good points, but the manipulable child is so easily swept into a whole new set of norms that have never been expected of human beings before.
Right.
It's never been expected that 100,000 people will like you. Never. Or hit
if you get fired.
Or hitting a button, that you have all these friends who aren't friends. It's not within the natural human behavioral repertoire to be able to emotionally respond to such things. And so, woe betide humanity if electricity suddenly ceases or these networks go down.
Yeah.
You're going to have people jumping off the tops of buildings because they're suddenly disconnected from their entertainment sources.
Right.
And it goes back to long ago I wanted to become a storyteller because I was an ecologist, because it's one of the activities that produces no ash.
Oh, no carbon, yeah.
There's no effluent from being a storyteller.
Yeah.
Which, other than hot air, which...
I was thinking that. I didn't want to say it, but I was thinking that.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, a couple of last questions.
Yeah, sure.
What's your favourite breakfast?
My favorite breakfast, though I cannot or will not eat it any longer, because I packed on some poundages last year, so I've sworn off carbohydrates. But my favorite breakfast by far would be a big stack of pancakes with butter and maple syrup, bacon, sausages, hash browns, and some scrambled eggs with some hot sauce available.
Wow. That's a pretty substantial breakfast.
Eat this and die.
Yes.
Why do you ask that question?
Have that on the license plate.
That's such a bizarre question.
I know. Oh, all right. So, where would your favourite place be to eat that breakfast? Like anywhere in the world, where would you go if you could?
On a porch, high in the mountains,
Mm-hmm.
or at the side of a lake in the mountains.
With whom?
Oh, with Mill.
Yeah.
Or just by myself.
Yeah.
That would do too. Because in this scenario, I'd be paying more attention to the breakfast than I would be to my wife.
Ooh.
She would like that.
What's Mill's favourite breakfast?
He likes yogurt with fruit and nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you think her favourite place would be?
She likes the out of doors as well. When we were first married, we used to lead river float trips down the Delaware Water Gap and take people on float trips.
Really?
And we would cook in the out of doors, this big place called Depew Island, which is in the middle of the Delaware River. And this is in the Water Gap Park area, so it's really very beautiful. At least it was when we were there. And we would,
How long ago was this? What year are you talking about?
1981, 82, around there. And the trees had never been logged, so the trees on this island create a cathedral-like effect. They're so huge and tall above you. And she would probably like to, pull up a canoe and build a campfire and pull out food and, sit on the canoes and eat there and go wandering.
That sounds good. Well, I think on that note we shall end the conversation that we have had today.
All right.
And it's been absolutely wonderful spending this time with you, just shooting the breeze and picking your brain.
Can I make you lunch?
That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll just turn this off and we'll have lunch.
All right, we will. Thanks, Oz.
You're welcome, Simon.
We covered a lot of ground in this interview and touched on a few things that Odds is passionate about. I hope you enjoyed hanging about with Odds as much as I did and do. Thanks, Odds. Really appreciate it. If you have not heard Odds before, you can find a ton of his material, if not all of it, on his website, oddsbodkin.net. That's oddsbodkin.net. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to check out other episodes. And if you think I should interview a certain folk and fairy tale, myths and legends storyteller, shoot me an email. You can find me and my own work on Facebook, Simon Brooks Storyteller, on my website, simonbrooksstoryteller.com, and on Instagram, Simon M for Michael Brooks, Simon M. Brooks. Diamond Scree? Yep, that's me, the English fella and storyteller. You can help keep this podcast alive by becoming one of my Patreons and paying anything from $1 for an episode that you enjoyed to a regular monthly subscription. In return, you get extras, early release, and exclusive content. And that's at www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. If you cannot do that, then help me out by doing something you can do. I would love it if you were to leave a review on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Podbeam, wherever you find this episode. It helps not just me, but it helps others find this podcast and know what they're getting into. Thanks again for being here with me. I know there are a lot of other places that you could be, and I appreciate it. Until next time, be healthy, be happy, and share the stories you love. Cheers. Simon out.